This is kind of an update. We'll see if, there we go. I'll give you kind of give you kind of an update on what the program's, what we've been doing in the program, kind of some background over the years. Laura mentioned the Baggett-Frazier Endowed Professorship. This is named after two individuals with who you at least know Jim Baggett, I'm pretty sure, who was my predecessor, my direct predecessor. And then Tex Frazier was predecessor before him. So Jim Baggett started his graduate career about the year I was born in 1954. And was, boy, it was in somewhere not that many years ago that he passed away. But just an amazing individual as a plant breeder, and I learned an awful lot from him too. So what I view as my what I'm supposed to be doing here in this position is breeding vegetable varieties for home gardeners, for processors, for the various fresh market growers around the state, and and creating new knowledge about breeding and genetics in various vegetable crops. This position has really been based around some processing crops. Green beans, we've had about 8,000 to 10,000 acres of green beans grown here in the valley. Sweet corn, broccoli. There's some other crops that are grown for processing, like squash and so forth. That seems to be shifting. Most of the sweet corn now is moving up into the Columbia Basin. I think they would move green beans up there if we had things that were heat tolerant enough. And that's becoming more and more of a theme, and I think in all breeding programs, breeding for heat and drought and things like that. Then in the fresh market, it just seems like there's so many things to work on, needs and opportunities, that I've worked on a number of other crops like tomatoes and winter squash, summer squash, edible potted peas, peppers, and so on. And I'll try to give you kind of an overview of some of that. One of the things I really enjoy about working here in Western Oregon is this is really a foodie's paradise. And, we can grow food year round. There are just amazing people to work with in terms of the chefs that are here, and the farmers, the growers too. And you periodically see articles like this, like in the New York Times, talking about how great the food is out here. Here's one: Portland even outranks Seattle in terms of best food in the nation. So, and I mentioned Jim Baggett in particular, and the varieties he developed. These are many of the things, and some of these are still pretty widely grown, like some of the peas, the Oregon Sugar Pod 2, Oregon Giant, Cascadia are all ones which are widely grown. The honey boats, winter squash, delicata squash, that's still grown, and even things like candy stick. You may be familiar with that variety. That's Carol Deppy's selection out of honey boat. OSU 19 is used in a hybrid that Johnny sells. There was summertime lettuce. I don't know if anybody grows that anymore. And then Riot and Marvels are a couple of ornamental peppers, and then pizza is like a mild jalapeno type pepper. And then of course there are the tomatoes, and this was quite Baggett left quite a legacy here. In particular with this idea around breeding tomatoes that were adapted to our cold, wet springs. And so making these tomatoes have a bush habit, which gives them some earliness, but then selecting for seedless trait called parthenocarpy, which allows them to set fruit without a fertilization. So you could get these varieties will get relatively early fruit set compared to normal tomatoes. And there's still some, like, for example, Gathering Together Farms still uses selects for their early season production because of the parthenocarpy, and that lets them, in their high tunnels, get these. They get a jump on the market with tomatoes. I don't know if I can move this screen down here. I'll put it up at the top. Anyway. And so these, and then down at the bottom are the five I've released, and we'll talk about the direction I took the tomato program, I guess is the way to put it here. Um, we started developing these types we call the Indigo type tomatoes, and I'll tell you more about them later. So here's a list of some of the varieties that we've been developing over the years. Cascadia broccoli, that was 2016. Patron yellow bean, it's a dry bean. Some edible potted peas. The one that's on the market right now is called Sweet Gem, carried by High Mowing and Siskiyou Seeds. And the gem is also kind of a code for Jim Baggett, Jim B. But he would never have wanted his name on something, but I think it's worth honoring him. The Midnight Roma tomatoes, these mild peppers, mild habanero peppers in the picture here. I'll talk about those in a little bit too. And then popping beans. This is the latest thing on the release. There's some new ones that I'm in the process of writing up. Tromboncino summer squash, some Blue Lake snap beans, and then there's other things, broccoli, various types of other white mold resistant snap beans. Working on a snap pea that has a really small pod, a bite-sized pod, calling those a petit pois type snap pea. More indigo tomatoes, late blight resistance tomatoes. We have a new form of late blight resistance that's, I think, better than the resistance that's out there now. And then some golden delicious type winter squash. Golden delicious, by the way, is the type of squash. If you drive around the valley, you see these fields of pumpkins. That's most likely going to be golden delicious out there. That's grown for both the puree and for seeds. And actually, there are more acres grown for seed, and a lot of that, you'll see fields where they've just gone through and busted the pumpkins and left them on the field. Well, they're just extracting the seed and bringing that in and drying it, cleaning it, drying it, and that's culinary seed. And it typically gets shipped over to Asian markets where it's very popular. So just to quickly mention the green bean breeding and broccoli programs aimed primarily at processing. I can say that it's actually kind of difficult. It's a lot more difficult breeding for processing than fresh market because the specifications are very precise. Processors need a variety that will behave the same in a certain way every time. And so I've had one success, and that was in 2005, released one snap bean that took over production in the valley. I would say it generated probably about $211 million in about a 16-year period. And this new one, the one here in the middle is 7318. This is going to be a new one that I hope will replace 5630. But industry hasn't accepted it yet. A lot of our work is on white mold. The picture down in the lower left there shows one of our experiments where we're testing with the disease. You can see we're killing most of the plants there, but there are a few that are still alive. Those are the ones that are the keepers in that process. Then in the broccoli for processing, one of the big constraints there is with the amount of labor that goes into harvesting broccoli, and labor's gotten even more expensive now with increases in the minimum wage and then overtime and things like that. And so these are broccoli types that have exerted heads that can be harvested mechanically. What you see here in this picture is a group of high school students who developed a broccoli bot. This is a kind of a prototype type machine that would go through the field, locate that head and cut it off. And they actually got a patent on the software, and some of these fabricating companies are using that now to develop machinery for this sort of thing. But my end of it is developing the genetics, these types that have exerted heads that are suitable for that type of harvest. They're heads that stick up. I unfortunately don't have a good picture of that, but they're the heads at the top of the canopy or even above the canopy. It just makes it a lot easier to harvest than something that's way down there in the canopy. And even beyond that, the trait is, I would call it a social justice trait, because the guys who are out there cutting the broccoli with knives, or in a broccoli, they may have to bend over quite a bit. But in these, there's not as much bending, even if you're harvesting by hand with those. So those are the processing crops. Then there's all this other stuff that is so interesting to work with. So, and Laura mentioned the work we've been doing in organic. I was the project director for the Novik project, which ran from about 2009 to 2022. It's funded by the USDA Organic Research and Extension Initiative, and we got funded twice more after the initial funding. It was very much of a farmer participatory project where we did on-farm trials, farmer participatory plant breeding, and the idea behind it was developing varieties that were adapted to seed production in organic system, so they could be grown as certified organic seed. And so we're trying to continue to increase the amount of certified organic seed that's available, and identifying varieties that do well in organic production as well. And this was a project done with a number of other states across the northern tier in the U.S. So some people would wonder, why do we need to breed for organic when we can breed for conventional? And the answer to that is, from a breeding standpoint, is you look at if you look at the interaction of the variety with the environment, the variety that's adapted to a particular environment will do best in that particular growing regime. And in terms of breeding, you really need to be breeding in that environment to identify the material that's best. So you can think of organic as a different environment. It primarily differs in what I've colored in yellow there, the soils, the microbiome, the fertility, how it achieves its fertility, the pests and weeds that are present in that system. And so selecting for varieties that can handle those differences is what's really important. There are other things that growers do, that they often have diverse markets and different end user needs. Quality can be even more important than absolute productivity in some of these systems. So that's kind of the rationale for it. We developed a number of materials. These are some of the crops in which we developed and released varieties. The sweet corn, if you're familiar with a variety called Who Gets Kissed, it's an open pollinated variety that was developed by Bill Tracy at University of Wisconsin, and that's available through several catalogs. The Sweet Gem is there under that numbers S1430. Picture of Jonathan Spiro was a farmer I worked with down in Southern Oregon to develop this broccoli that he eventually named Solstice, that's available in catalog. So that's just some of the legacy of that particular project. Out of this we started working with chefs, and this is a very interesting collaboration between breeders and chefs. Chefs usually want novelty in what they're doing, so they're always interested in what breeders might bring in, particularly if it's somewhat different than the normal market class for something. And I was working with Lane Selman, she's in the picture down at the very bottom, who established the Culinary Breeding Network. And we started doing tastings with chefs, and in this particular case, with the Italian sweet peppers, we were getting good field data, and we knew which ones performed well in the field, but then through the tasting and the interaction with chefs, we were able to identify those that were really good quality, eating quality, and also handling quality. There were certain traits like whether the top was indented or round that chefs told us about what they like. And so this actually, how many people know Frank Morton and Wild Garden Seed? Yeah. Well, he was, one of these peppers was his, and he was about, I think, ready to drop the pepper breeding program that he had going, but then the chefs said, okay, this variety is really great, and started asking for it in farmers markets in Portland by name and putting it in their menus, and his seed sales went through the roof. And we were able to facilitate a project like that. But it convinced me that chefs were really important, the process and what they might tell you about these vegetables. And so out of this, Lane started doing these variety showcases, and this is a list of some of the ones that have happened. How many have been to variety showcase? Definitely, you have to go. So, I think, yeah, there's actually going to be one in Honolulu in May. So, or not in Honolulu, but on the Big Island in Kona. And so, yeah, I'm going to that one. Anyway, so the last one was in Portland in 2024. It had more than 700 people there. That was the capacity of the Red where this was held. And it's just a pretty amazing event where, chefs and breeders are paired. The breeders bring in their new stuff, and chefs do interesting things to it. And then the public's invited in. They usually have tastings, things you can taste there. And there's also an opportunity for education too, because people will have to have little displays on their table. I should have looked that up. If you go to the Lane site, it's Culinary Breeding Network. There should be a schedule on there. I think there will be one in this coming fall, but
in Portland?
Probably in Portland, yeah, in this area. There's going to be, okay, so next week there is the Organic Seed Growers Conference here in Corvallis at the LaSalle's and the Alumni Center, and there will be a mini showcase then on, I think that's what is that, Saturday night or something like that?
At LaSalle's?
At LaSalle's, Friday or Saturday. Anyway, yeah, it's sort of a scaled down version of it. Anyway, I've learned a lot just working with chefs and been amazed with what they would do with some of these things. So I'll go through some of that with some of these projects. And the mild habanero peppers, this is, I call this an accidental breeding project because I didn't really have an intention to be breeding peppers, but I got this mild habanero from Kevin Crosby, who was a breeder down at Texas A&M University, and really liked the pepper for this tropical fruity flavor that these types of peppers have. These are a different species. These are Capsicum chinense versus the Capsicum annuums that we normally grow. But it spontaneously outcrossed in my trials to a hot habanero. So the next year, it was quite variable. So then I just started reselecting for the mild form and also for earliness, because most of these chinense types are pretty tropical and late for us. And so came up with a pepper that's about 10 days to 2 weeks earlier than your typical habanero pepper in terms of maturity, as well as having this low heat. There's a little bit of pungency in it, just enough to, yeah, just a touch. And I find that you have to have a little bit of this pungency to have the full aroma and flavor that these types of peppers have. So that, okay, these are available from Territorial. Just, I think it went in the catalog online last week, so you can find them there. Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know how sales are going. Okay, well, let's see. I have the names. It's on the poster too. Chinense, yeah, capsicum Chinense is the, yeah, so they're not a hada and mild thing. That's, those are, we've, we've had a lot of fun with the naming on these. Mild thing is, that's a takeoff on the song, the old Trog song, Wild Thing. Yeah. We'll have a sing along here in a minute. So these peppers, what chefs were doing with these peppers was interesting. So here's like kind of a typical. I'm trying to remember this. This was probably Aubergines, our chef at Aubergines who did this. But basically using it as a condiment with the tuna, the ahi that's on the plate there. But here's what this is another chef who was a pastry chef and made it into an orange sherbet, and that flavor was pretty amazing too. It is. I think it'd be really good in some kind of ice cream. And then I had another chef make it into a soda, which was flavoring, which was a wonderful flavoring too for a soda. So yeah, here's the release, not a hada, mild thing. The not a hada, you can see that there's a little bit of difference in shape. Not a hada is a wax type in the immature fruit stage, so the fruit are kind of yellowish. You can harvest at that stage and use them a little bit earlier, or sell them if you're in the marketing. The mild thing has a green fruit and then ripens to red like this. So that's the basic difference. My personal preference is for the mild thing because that's got a little more intense flavor than the nata hada. But the nata hada seems to be more widely adapted. So I'm kind of thinking that might be the one that's grown elsewhere in the US. So mild thing for Oregon and nata hada for the rest of the country. So Nikki in the picture there, Nikki Goodero, was the one who came up with the names. And I'm terrible at names. In fact, I need names for the popping beans. And maybe we could do a naming contest here. But what's that? Boom bean. Well, I'll start taking notes here. Anyway, so Nikki she has a company called Hot Mama Salsa, does all these really interesting types of salsas and things. She, at the showcase, she did this tostada with, those are actually some of my yellow beans in the dish with the peppers and all. Very nice dish. And then the stickers and the posters were something that Lane said, you've got to do this. And I said, oh, that's not something breeders do, but I've been amazed at the popularity of those, and I've even had people coming up and having me autograph the posters, things like that. So okay, so that's the peppers, the popping beans. So popping beans are something that were developed by Native Americans, and they've been around for thousands of years in Peru and Ecuador, and they're being basically grown at high elevation, where if you were to try to boil the beans, you're talking about 3 hours, and think about 3 hours with firewood. That's a lot of firewood to be able to cook your beans. So these are beans that can be just kind of put on the hearth and parched, and they'll puff. They don't turn inside out like popcorn does. They just kind of puff, and they soften, and they're edible. And the anti-nutritional factors are denatured, so they're good to eat. And in my tests, I've been doing them in the microwave, generally 90 to 115 seconds. We went back and tested this microwave. It's a lot more powerful and probably does them in about 60 seconds or so. So the uses of these, there's no product and no market here in the US for these types of beans, but they could be used as a snack food. be a very high protein, very healthy type of snack food, even better than corn nuts and things like that, I think. But the other thing that I think is potentially very useful for these is that they can be used to make dehydrated products that are a lot more energy efficient. And if you think about the Taco Bells that use dehydrated refried beans in an operation, those refries have to be soaked and boiled, and then that water burned off, and again, and then so you have this product that's dry. And with these, you can just pop them, you can mill them, and then they would be ready to go. I've found if I take some beans like what's in the picture there, I put them in a pot with water and I boil them in 10 minutes, so they have the consistency of a regular dry bean. It's been cooked.
Not with a pre-soak or anything, they just go right in.
Yeah, they're already soft and ready to eat.
You're growing with this elevation?
Yes. So what I did was I transferred that popping trait into a background that's adapted here in the US.
It's what the daylight sensitive, the traditional varieties can prove.
Yes. Well, and this is true of many crops that come from the tropics, is that they will only flower when the days get to a certain short day length. In Peru, it's around 12 hours, 12 to 13 hours. We don't hit that until sometime in September. So beans that start flowering then won't have seed that's ready in our climate. So we put them into this day length insensitive background, so they will be ready. They're ready in about 100 days in our climate here. Yes. Not yet. I don't have anybody selling them yet, but we're just in the process of getting them released. There have been people who have tried to market them, I think, from Peru and from South America, but that hasn't been sustainable at this point. So the indigenous Nunya or popping beans are pole beans, climbers. They'll get 10 or 12 feet tall or so. When I made my crosses, I crossed to a bush type. So I was able to put them into a bush background, and that helps with the earliness and makes them more compact and easier to grow in your garden.
Online, has the lectin content of the popping or tuna beans been evaluated?
The lectin, I think actually the phytohemagglutinin and yeah, that's the main compound we're concerned about in these beans. That there's been some evaluation of them, and they do have these compounds present, but they disappear when you pop them. And one of the things we want to do in this research that we're doing is determine whether their levels are similar or lower than what's in existing dry bean varieties. But in our work so far, the compound seems to disappear. And I think what probably happens in a popping bean is you put these, when you're cooking these beans, as they heat up, there's this extreme pressure and high temperature that develops in the seed, and then it ruptures and explodes, and in that process, I would guess that the proteins in there are the structure of the proteins are changed, so they're no longer biologically effective. But that's a hypothesis at this point as to what's going on in there. We have this USDA SRI grant is a project that just got funded. We hope it stays funded with. But anyway, it's a project to work on the breeding of genetics and develop products and markets with these beans. So the two that I'm releasing, you can see some of the variation in these types of beans. Some of them are quite pretty, but the two I'm releasing are the ones that are circled in the upper top, and they're basically a small black bean. One of the things we found is that the best poppers tend to be these dark uniform colors. And that may have something to do with heat transfer. The other thing you often see with popping beans is they tend to be spherical in shape, which I think also has to do with a uniform heat transfer. And so, yeah, so here's the parent in the upper right of the variety I used and crossed to the small black bean and then the progeny. And we, at the variety showcase, we paired with Andina, chefs at Andina, Peruvian restaurant in Portland. And they did, they made basically a little snack with their seasonings. So with these things, it was really quite good.
You had said that the one that was just coming available at Territorial Academy was a 2023 release. So if this is a 2025 release, we'll see it in the seed market maybe 2 years later, or
I hope just 1 year.
1 year. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's oh, sure. The question was about the release, the time lag after release on how long it takes to get a variety out. And generally, yeah, it's 1 to 2 years or so. So the yellow beans, just while we're on the theme of dry beans, this is a regular dry bean. But how many people have experienced these yellow beans? They're Pederanos or Mayacoba beans. If you go to Winco, you can find them in the bulk food section there. This is the pinto of Sinaloa, put it that way. Very popular in the western state of Mexico. And it's an excellent bean, very nice cooking quality, very nice eating. It's quick cooking. And I've developed one, released it in 2018. It has had some limited success. Very high yielding, good disease resistance, good maturity. But the color was a little bit light on it. You can see here Patron in the middle of these images. And so the Higuera is a cultivar from down in Mexico that has really nice color. And so we were able to transfer that color into some of these. So I'm still trying to sort out between several breeding lines, which is the best. So the DBY 2234 is one of our breeding lines. We also look, the Patron is available in Higuera. If you went to Mexico, Higuera would be, but not the breeding lines yet. Those are still in the works. Well, the other thing I'd point out is we looked at their performance in dry farm conditions, and you can see the differences in seed quality there. The Higuera really falls apart, but our material holds up pretty well under dry farming. Okay, Tramontino squash. That's a summer squash. That's another one. How many people have had a Tramontino? Quite a few. Yeah. So there's the traditional landrace or heritage variety. It's a basically Italian derived. The Italians, before they had summer squash or any kind of squash from the New World, they had these edible vaginary, which is what Chris is holding in that picture, the gourd in front. So it's basically a bottle gourd. It's non-bitter, can be eaten. And so they had kind of a picture of what they might do with squash when they got the New World squash. And so one of the things they did was create this this thing out of a butternut or something very similar to a butternut. That's a summer squash. It has really long neck. The neck is solid. It's very meaty. The flavor on them is excellent. They are on a regular vine. Rather than a bush type habit. And I thought, well, let's try to put them on a bush habit. I really didn't succeed with that part of it, but we also found some different skin colors. And so we have some tan and some yellow types as well. Yeah, I like cooking with them because they're just really solid and meaty. In some ways more like a winter squash than a summer squash. And some of the yellows will produce as bicolored fruit like you see down at the very bottom there. So 2 lines of that are under development. What chefs have done with these? One chef, Dev and Jackie at Serious Pie up in Seattle, made these into suckers. So they take these little segments, they soak them in simple sugar solution, and then he added some Indian spices to that and put them on a stick, and they're very tasty, very chewy. And then Chris here made a gazpacho with this. That was really delicious. So those things always kind of amaze me. So how am I doing on time? Are we
Carry on.
okay? So this is I move on to the tomatoes. And so the tomato project was another one of these accidental things where wasn't really on my radar. I had a grad student come in and was interested in working with carotenoids in tomato because they're associated with all the colors, like lycopene, beta carotene, alpha carotene, delta carotene, prolycopene. These are all different carotenoids that tomatoes have. And so we were looking at them and evaluating their genetics and health effects. And he noticed that in this germplasm collection, there were some that had a little bit of purple on them. And that was about the time people were discovering anthocyanins, and this was about 2000. So anthocyanins and their health benefits. He said, let's get those and check them out. And so this one in the lower left, labeled AFT, is one of the lines we used. That's AFT stands for anthocyanin fruit, and then ATV is atroviolaceum. So this is what the original material looked like that we started working with, that have just a kind of a blush, or even you can't even really see it in the ATV material. But you need a hand lens and look, and you'll see individual cells that have a bit of purple to them. These traits come from different wild species. There were breeders before we started working with the material that integressed these traits into cultivated tomato. And then, well, ABG is another one too, but we've not been able to work with that one. It's not very stable. But then we said these levels they're kind of cute, but can we do anything to increase the level? We started crossing between the AFT and the ATV, and you can see the result here, this dramatic increase in the pigment of those. It's light induced. So this little series here is the tomatoes over about a week period, and you can see that under UV light, the green sectors will color up. And the tomatoes will do that even off the vine. So if you pick these, put them in your window, turn them upside down, and then they will continue to color. And it's primarily in the skin and the outer layers of the flesh where you find the pigment. There is, how many people have heard of the new GMO tomato, purple tomato? There's a new one that has been released. Anybody can get seed of it and grow it. I think it's going to create a lot of confusion with these indigo tomatoes, but the main difference with it is that it's purple all the way through the center on that. So if you see one that's purple to the center, it's going to be a GMO. So of the releases that we've had, Indigo Rose was the first in 2011. It has its limitations, I guess I would say, but you have to start somewhere, and this was the first that came out. And then we released a series of cherry tomatoes. These are the Indigo cherry drops, Indigo pear drops, and Indigo kiwi. Unfortunately, no one's ever picked up Indigo kiwi, but it is available if somebody wanted to sell seed of that one.
Is it less acid than the?
It is less acid and sweeter. And to me, it has the best flavor of this series of tomatoes. These are all, these kind of taste a lot better than Indigo Rose, and have just really nice qualities. So those are the cherry series, and then Midnight Roma is a paste tomato. Chefs really like this one for the flavor. Usually paste tomatoes are pretty bland and flavorless, but this one has good flavor. It gelatinizes very nicely, so it makes a really nice sauce.
How long? How long does it take to get into ripe?
So, depends on the variety. So something like Indigo Cherry Drops is about a 60-day tomato. Midnight Roma, Indigo Rose are more like 80-day maturities or so. And that's something I haven't figured out, whether there is this association between lateness and the pigmentation.
For the raffle prize is one of the elements of each of them is a seed of this one here.
Yeah. So this one's available if you want to buy it. This one's available from row 7 too. Row 7. It's a seed company that was started by Dan Barber, who's a fairly seed down right here on in the chef's apron. ROW 7, number 7. That's the Midnight Room. The company specializes in very high quality foods, vegetables, and that sort of thing. We had a coming out party in Portland with this variety, and Dan Barber and Michael Mazurik, who's the other founder of this company, came out. Michael's a breeder at Cornell University, and had pizza made with these tomatoes. And, Earl Bloom. Well, we've got popping news here. So, and then it's been quite a ride with these because there's been all this publicity. You can see where over the years people have published about them. They've been in Times Square. And now really they've gone global. My nephew was in Sweden a couple of years ago and went into a supermarket, and he took this picture here of these looks like Indigo Rose in the supermarket. This is Midnight Roma in the market of choice here in Corvallis. And I regularly see these kinds of tomatoes, not mine, but I see Indigo tomatoes. Like if you in the co-op, there's in their heirloom basket, there's something that is one of these, and I want to figure out what that one is. And so I'm in restaurants. I had a salad in Castor the other night, and they were using what looked like Indigo Cherry Drops on it. So it's really been a pretty amazing from that standpoint. The other thing was there was this release of this material for my program without my knowledge, or and so if you Google OSU Blue or P20, you will find these tomatoes that were disseminated. The person who did it went by the handle Bindery Beth in Dave's Garden Forum, where the seed was released. But I don't know how she got the seed. But basically, it starts out with, I have these seeds. It's something that's genetically engineered. I don't think you really want it, but I'll offer the seed anyway. And so people started growing these and crossing with them. And that's, I think, the source of many of these indigo types that are now out there. There are over 50 cultivars of these indigo types. So it's sort of like we've been the birth of a new market class in tomatoes with these. And a lot of it hasn't been my breeding, but it's been my genetics that has done this. And for me, it's gone from, the health aspects to the aesthetics. These are just amazing in terms of color. And, this was a cross with Ananas Noir, which has that red core and the kind of the yellow flesh. And then you add the purple crown to it. It makes a lovely tomato, and it tastes good too. And then they've made their way into art. How many people are familiar with Deb Stoner's still lifes? They're pretty amazing. But I don't know what concourse they're on now, but at PDX, if you walk through the airport, there's a series of images of hers on permanent exhibit, a year in the Willamette Valley. And one of them, I think it's the August harvest or summer harvest is what it's called. The August plate is I was walking down the row admiring the photos and I saw the tomatoes there and I go, wait a minute. And so I emailed Deb and she said, yes, those were indigo rose. And I was floored. Oh, well, that means I've got to finish up pretty quick here. So yeah, another picture that she did, we invited her down. And so like these are fruits from the vegetable farm and the Lewis Brown farm. And then you can see down in the corner here, some indigo pear drops in those. Yeah, I'm about at the end here. So just talking about kind of where we're headed. I'm actually retiring in July or so, going on to a half-time appointment for a couple of years, hoping to finish up some of these projects, but hoping also that we can hire a new plant breeder to take over the vegetable breeding program. But I see breeding for organic systems is important, and that really helps us get a climate change resilience, because we really have to breed for resilience in organic because the environments are so variable. And we need to be breeding for heat stress and drought stress. Flavor, taste, nutrition, those are all going to be important. My project's also gone off in the direction of looking at plant microbe interactions and breeding for facilitating those sorts of interactions. And then there are going to be changes in vegetable production here in Oregon. I think maybe processing will be shifting into higher acreage areas, larger scale production areas like Eastern Oregon, whereas here in the West, we're still going to see a lot of fresh market production. We really do that well here. And there's certain crops that won't go there, like broccoli and cauliflower we won't grow well in the high heat conditions on the east side. And then there are new crops. These are some things that kind of intrigue me. This is kind of squash you find in South America. We've gotten as far as determining that the pigment in that squash is chlorophyll. And what's a squash doing with chlorophyll in the middle of the fruit? And then there are things like this is mashua in this different kinds of mashua, and this is another one of these Andean tuber crops, and just amazing colors, and those actually seem to grow pretty well here. But there are other Andean tuber crops that we could grow here as well. So there's just a lot of things to continue working on here. So yeah,
We do have some already online, and a couple I arrived with that came beforehand, but let's just do the room first. And
Does your breeding program have any kind of like newsletter?
not really.
No.
Oh, is there any kind of newsletter for the breeding program? No. There is a website. Yeah, there is a website. You know, it's kind of a clunky thing with my bio and publications and things like that. Not a lot of pictures, but no, we could do more on that end. It's a matter of resources, is what I would say. Is
And I found when I Googled James Meyers OSU, and I had to make sure I spelled Myers the way you do. It came right up to your page with lots of links. So it's Myers. That was a one-step too. So
yeah,
you know.
yeah.
Let's just test if you can hear. Can folks hear online?
These are not talking. Oh.
All right, are you hearing us online? Give a thumbs up if you can. I see a nod. Are you hearing online? Okay, yes.
Okay, good.
Great, thank you.
What were the questions?
Let's see, one in the back.
Years to take this development.
So the question is, how many years does it take to develop a variety? I generally figure on a decade, 10 years or so. And it may take longer than to actually get it out in commercial, make it commercially available. Yeah.
Similar. Just how do you know when you have something that's finished and ready for release? Do you know?
Well, that's sometimes kind of difficult because the question was, how do you know when something's ready to release? Sometimes there are a couple different answers to that. One is that you can't just wait till you have something that's absolutely perfect because you'll never get there. So you have to at some point say, this is good enough. I'm going to get it out there. It's better than what's out there. And so let's release it. The
Chefs help you make those decisions?
Yes, it has actually. Like with the peppers, you know, it was encouragement to go with the release and what they were interested in.
Online earlier in the chat, so tell more about the Norton pepper.
Hmm.
It said Frank Norton.
Frank Morton. Okay, the Frank Morton, he's actually released several peppers. He bred several of these sweet Italian type peppers. So the one in particular that I was talking about was called Stocky Red Roaster, which is a fairly small pepper, fairly small, thin skin, but very sweet, very productive pepper. But he's released some others, like Gatherer's Gold is another of his, and Jolene's Red. Go to his catalog website, so Wild Garden Seed, and you would see. Frank's actually he's shifted his program primarily over to growing flowers and that sort of thing, producing flower seed. He says that's a lot more profitable and a lot less labor than doing vegetables. So, and as you get older, you think about things like that. Other questions? Okay, well, thank